Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Gateway in St. Louis, Missouri, a place where it's known for the big arch, it's barbecue, it's Kansas City Chiefs, and Gateway Motorsports Park or Worldwide Technology Raceway. And for the second year, the NASCAR Cup Series made their trip to this track, which dealt with weather, brake problems, and the Polster coming home victorious in what has been a very impressive year in his first year with a new team. Let's get into all that went down yesterday at Gateway. Number 1, Kyle Rowdy Busch, with his third win of the season, finally adds another track to his resume that he's won at in the Cup Series. As yesterday, Kyle Busch captured the Enjoy Illinois 300 at Gateway, beating out Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano, Kyle Larson, and Martin Truex Jr. for the victory. The whole weekend for Kyle Busch in general was solid. Got his first career pole with RCR on Saturday, putting him on the front row for the race. And from the start, he was really strong. The first stage, he won the stage and led all but one lap. That one lap, I believe, that he didn't lead was the first lap that actually was led by Ryan Blaney. But regardless, Kyle Busch, especially in the clean air, was so strong. When he lost his track position in the clean air at the start of stage 2, he hovered in the top 5, but really couldn't seem to get back up there and pass whoever was in front, whether it was Ryan Blaney or Denny Hamlin or somebody else for the win. He had to kind of fight for it. In the final stage, he kept himself up in the top 5 in the mix the entire time, and then with about, I think, halfway through the final stage, he passed Ryan Blaney on the outside of turn number 4 because he had fresher tires, and Kyle Busch held that for the rest of the race. Or actually, it was Kyle Larson who was on 2 tires that Kyle Busch was able to pass. And they were on different strategies. Kyle Busch was able to pass Larson, but towards the end of the race, Kyle Busch had to go through restart after restart after restart after restart because there was always something going on behind him in the middle of the pack. And that final restart, he got a good launch going into turn 1 and was able to hold off a hard-charging Denny Hamlin from behind to get his third win of the season and win at a track that is obviously relatively new to the Cup schedule, a track that he's won at before in the lower divisions, but not in the Cup Series. He nearly won this race last year in that thrilling battle at the end with Joey Logano, but Logano got the better of Kyle Busch at the very end of that race. But this time, Kyle Busch is able to make up for it and celebrate with his team and his family. Samantha was there, Braxton was there, their little girl's name, I forget who it is, I'm so sorry, but regardless, Kyle Busch was strong the entire weekend. It was perhaps the most complete weekend I've seen from Kyle Busch since his Fontana win earlier this year, where it was only race 2 of the season, and then already he'd won with his brand new team. And ever since Kyle came to RCR, I felt like it was going to be a match made for both of them to put themselves in championship contention. And it really has been that case for the majority of the season. There have been a few races where they didn't have the results that they had hoped for. They didn't run as well like they hoped to. But there are some races where they're able to overcome adversity and put together the best result possible. Remember, last weekend, he spun out towards the end of stage 2 in the middle of the pack, got hit in the door, and he rallied back to finish in the top 10. That's how good Kyle Busch is. And when you put him in this type of equipment, he can be a dominant force and make a lot of people quiver in their racing shoes when that guy is up there battling for the win. But it was a great weekend for Kyle Busch to win the pole and win the race. He's now tied with William Byron for the most wins this year by a race car driver at 3. I guarantee there will be more wins on the way. But right now, if we have to put Kyle Busch in the championship conversation or title conversation right now, I'd say absolutely. He's been so good. So congrats to Kyle and Randall Burnett and the A-Team on their big win yesterday. Number 2, Kyle Larson takes a car that was bad at the beginning into a top 5 finish. Yesterday, at the start of the race, Kyle Larson started in 22nd and at one point slipped back to as low as 32nd. That car was junk. He was complaining about on the radio saying, I can't turn the car. There's no grip. I don't know what to do. But they kept working on it. And by stage 2, he started to slowly, methodically work his way through the field. And by the time we got to the end of stage 2, he cracked the top 10 and got the last point, beating out Martin Truex Jr. The final stage still held around 10th to 12th for the most part. Then they took a gamble late in the race when some drivers took 4. They put on 2 tires, and it helped them keep track position up at the front of the field. And looked like if this 2-tire gamble pays off for Larson, he could have himself a really good result, or he could have won victory lane. But Kyle Busch was just stronger, especially with those 4 fresh tires. But regardless, I think the gamble paid off for Larson, the 5 team, because they took the car that was mud pie at the beginning into a top 5 finish at the end of the day. I mean, I don't know how Cliff Daniels does it. Sometimes they take a car that they're not happy with, and they make the most out of it at the end of the day, which sometimes means victory lane or top 5. And that's exactly what happened to Kyle Larson yesterday. He still, I think, is one of the favorites to be in the championship 4 conversation later this year, along with his teammate William Byron and Kyle Busch. But Kyle Larson yesterday showed that you can overcome adversity at the beginning and rally late to put together a solid result. So kudos to that 5 team and what they were able to accomplish yesterday. Number 3, Ryan Blaney, off of the dominating performance at the Coke 600, battles back this week with a top 10 finish. Ryan Blaney, in the beginning, he was strong. Started on the front row with Kyle Busch, and he seemed to be one of the best forwards. Practically, he was the best forward all day yesterday. I don't think he ever left the top 10. Matter of fact, he was top 5 for the majority of the race, but he slipped back at the end and finished 6th. But stage 2, he was untouchable, especially when you have that clean air. Nobody can seem to catch you. Even though he had challenges from behind by either Kyle Busch or Denny Hamlin, he held them off and he was able to get stage number 2. Stage 3, he had the track position at clean air, but then there was one of those pit stops in the middle of that final stage where they lost track position when guys took 2 tires, and plus there was a close call coming out of the pits when they nearly got slammed in the outside safer barrier wall where everybody's coming off of pit road by the 34 car of Michael McDowell. But thankfully, no harm was done to the car. He was able to get back up there. There were times that he was in the top 5, and I felt like if he at least cleared the 11 in the 5 car, he could have had something for Kyle Busch. But some of those restarts, he just kept slipping back, and at the end of the day, he comes away with the 6th place finish. But off the win from last weekend, Blaney's on a really good run right now, and the Fords in general this weekend seemed to bring some speed to the race, because a couple weeks ago they were worried about, we were talking about what's going on with Ford. They're not really doing well, and Joey Logano has been complaining, saying that we're a little bit behind. But last weekend, Ryan Blaney wins the 600. This weekend, Blaney really strong. Logano top 5. Kevin Harvick got a top 10. Michael McDowell, who spun out earlier in the race, he came back and finished 9th place. The Fords did bring some good speed this weekend. Do they need some more progress on some of the bigger tracks? I definitely think so, because this track is a 1.25 mile track, the only 1.25 mile track that we go to on the schedule. So there's still some more to do, but in general, the Fords, led by Blaney yesterday until the very end of the race, they did their part, and Blaney had another solid run yesterday. Number 4, brake rotors. Braking. My goodness gracious, that was a rough day on brake rotors yesterday. Now, obviously, what happened at the beginning of the race was that we had an early caution for a spin from Tyler Reddick, and then the track started to cool down because there was light pop-up showers in the area, and of course, lightning strikes, and we had to have those delays. We had almost 2-hour delay, but we got the race back on. The track cooled down, which obviously meant more grip to the track, but on these long straightaways and these tight corners, a lot of these guys are using their brakes in the corners, especially when shifting, and 4 times yesterday we had brake rotors fail. The first one was Carson Hocevar, who was making his Cup debut in the 7 car because Corey LaJoie was in the 9 car for the suspended Chase Elliott. Carson Hocevar was running in the top 20 and looked like he had top 15 speed until down the front stretch off into turn 1, and this was in the beginning of stage 2. It seemed like the right front rotor broke and the car went right into the outside wall, taking Hocevar out of the race. And it's a shame because he was running very, very well, and I guarantee you he will be back in the Cup Series eventually. Then the next brake rotor we had fail was Tyler Reddick in the 45 car, who was rebounding from that early spin. He was in the top 10, and then the car shut up into turn 1 on the outside wall. It was once again a brake rotor. The third incident was Noah Gragson. I don't know if it was the right front brake rotor or if it was the right rear. It may have been the right front rotor, but when he crashed into turn 1, he dived down the apron and then went up into the outside wall really hard. A hard impact that actually brought up the red flag for the second time today so they could clean up all the debris and mess that came from him. And then late in the race, instead of overtime, Bubba Wallace, who was about ready to get a top 10 finish and keep his hot streak going, he blows a right front tire with the brake rotor failing into turn 1. I am just very baffled by these rotors. We didn't have any issues with these last year, with the lone exception of Kevin Harvick late in the race, which set up that battle for the win between Logano and Kyle Busch. Brake rotors this time, 4 drivers. It is completely baffling to me. Obviously, again, the long straightaways that kind of act like a drag strip, even though these straightaways are not as long as Pocono, even as flat as this track is, but you could tell that the brake rotors yesterday, especially into turn number 1, you literally were just got off the steering wheel and hanging on for dear life because those rotors were exploding and sending these guys into the outside wall. Definitely something that was a big problem yesterday. First time I think we've really had brake rotor problems for many, many drivers in a race yesterday with this new next gen car. But it happened, and unfortunately some of these guys had to fall to the wayside because of that. And number 5, the racing product out there this time around, year 2 at Gateway. I thought like there was more competitive battles out there this time than there was last year, because last year after some of these restarts, which by the way are very, very fun when they're 3 and 4 wide coming off of turn 2 down the back stretch and even coming off of turn 4, they're fun. But then after about maybe 10 to 15 laps, they get spread out. But there were a few battles when drivers' handling began to fall off and other guys caught them from behind. But there was more battles, I think, this year than there was last year, because for one thing, The track was a little cooler, and I felt like allowed other drivers to maneuver the way in different grooves around the track, whether they're tucked to the bottom of the racetrack or maybe running a higher arc in 1 and 2. 3 and 4 is a little bit tricky because there's not much banking like there is in 1 and 2. But at the end of the day, there was a lot of good battles at the very end of the race, even though there were some big cautions late in the race. One incident in particular that drew some headlines was the caution, I think, before the bubble walls brake rotor failure late in the race, which involved Austin Dillon, Austin Cindric, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. They were racing outside the top 10, and Cindric is right behind Dillon in some way, and it seems like either Cindric's coming down or Dillon's coming up to try to block him from position, and the 3 car gets bumped and turned up and collects the 47 to Stenhouse, and they both scrape the outside wall, and we had to have another red flag so we could fix the outside wall because it took some beatings yesterday with those drivers that were scrubbing it after brake rotor failures, and that incident with the 3 and the 47. Austin Dillon called out Austin Cindric as saying he needs to be suspended for that, basically comparing it in some ways to the Chase Elliott Denny Hamlin thing last week at Charlotte. Yeah, I say no. First of all, Austin Cindric did not intentionally turn the 3 car. He was trying to get behind him, but maybe timed it late, and Austin Dillon was kind of moving up at the same time. Is that a blame on any one of those guys for that incident? No, it's racing. It's how it goes. But to call out somebody thinking that you kind of hooked him, he didn't hook him like, I'm going to turn dead left into you and turn you into the outside wall. It was not that. It was not like what happened last weekend or Las Vegas last year. It was not that. And obviously now with the technical data with this next-gen car, we can find out, like, was it intentional? I don't think it was intentional. It did not look to be intentional at all. So Austin Dillon kind of was a little upset because they were almost close to a top 10. But at the end of the day, he has a wrecked race car along with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Dillon wasn't happy about it, but I don't really think Cindric did it on purpose at all. And I don't think it was an intentional dump and turn into the outside wall like what happened last weekend. But craziness all around yesterday for what was a relatively interesting race, even though we had lightning. But in general, I felt like we had better battles out there this time than we did 1 year ago. And also this weekend, we had Michael Waltrip and Kenny Wallace up in the booth for the Fox broadcast with Mike Joy and Clint Boyer. Michael was there the entire race. Kenny Wallace, the St. Louis, Missouri native, joined us for Stage 2 to talk dirt racing and how big it was for NASCAR to be at Gateway in St. Louis, Missouri for the second year in a row for the Cup Series. And hopefully we still have a future at this track because I feel like that the restarts are very fun and entertaining. And unlike last year, this time around, I think with the changing track conditions and the weather, we had much better battles and side-by-side action. Although, when you get out front in clean air, it's obviously tough to catch up to a guy and pass them. But in the middle of the pack, where there's obviously dirty air affecting everybody, there's always going to be some battles. And I felt like there was a good amount of battles this time than there was, once again, a year ago. But the funny thing of the race for the broadcast guys was actually on the way to the booth, before the start of the race, Michael Waltrip lost his iPhone that fell in the safer barrier section on the front stretch. Thankfully, one of the production crew or track officials was able to retrieve Michael's phone and get it back to him. That was very funny. I mean, obviously you're in a rush to get to a booth, but thank goodness it wasn't on the track and didn't get run over by the competitors, or else you would have had to buy yourself another phone, Mikey. But it was really fun to hear him and Clint contribute together with what's going on the track. Kenny Wallace, he's always a hoot, and he's still a big supporter of NASCAR, even though he still races locally and it's local dirt tracks. It was a good broadcast with all those guys yesterday, so it was fun to hear Mikey, Kenny, and Clint, egg each other on and have a good time at Gateway yesterday. It was definitely a fun broadcast. Now we're off to our second road course race of the season at Sonoma. The final race of the season also for NASCAR on Fox. It'll be Mike Joy, Clint Boyer, and Jamie McMurray in the booth for this weekend's race. And this is the last race we'll have rotating analysis for Fox, because next year it'll be Mike Joy, Clint Boyer, and the soon-to-be retired Kevin Harvick, who will join us in NASCAR on Fox when we head to Daytona next year. The final Fox broadcast of the season. And next week we're going to Sonoma in wine country, where last year Daniel Suarez scored his first career Cup victory, beating out Chris Buescher. And we've seen Kyle Larson win very well there. We've seen Martin Truex Jr. do very well there, and Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch. So what will happen this time by? Will Suarez back up from his win a year ago? Will Kyle Larson, Martin Truex Jr. show their strength at Sonoma this time around? Or will the guy coming off the suspension, who's been known as the road course king, Chase Elliott, be in the conversation? Which, this is not one of his best road courses, but he's always been a relatively top 5 contender the entire time. We shall see what happens next weekend in wine country. But hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the rest of your week. Subscribe, like, and once again, congrats to Kyle Busch and the A-Team on their very impressive win at Gateway yesterday. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!